The massive ship floated in space like a dark mountain made of metal. Its name was Dominion's Edge, and it belonged to the Zephyrian Empire. Inside its cold halls, Admiral Kethfer walked with heavy steps. His blue skin gleamed under the bright lights, and his 6 eyes focused on the task ahead. Today was special for the Empire. Today they would show the galaxy what happened to those who dared to fight back. Admiral Kethfer looked through the thick glass window at the cargo bay below. 50,000 beings stood there in glowing force fields. They could not move. They could not escape. They were Alterans, a peaceful people who only wanted fair trade and basic rights. The Admiral's mouth twisted into what might have been a smile. These creatures had made a mistake. They had asked for too much. They had forgotten their place in the Empire's grand design. Now they would pay the price, and every world in the galaxy would see what defiance cost. Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck with other diplomats from different worlds. He was the only human among them. His brown hair was neat, his blue suit clean, but his hands shook slightly as he watched the scene below. The Empire had invited representatives from many species to watch this demonstration of justice. They called it that, but Jake knew better. The Alterans below looked scared but not broken. Some held hands through the energy barriers. Others whispered prayers to their gods. Children pressed close to their parents. Jake had met some of these people during his time on their home world. They were farmers, teachers, doctors. They grew food that fed half the sector. They had never hurt anyone. A tall alien with green skin and 4 arms stood next to Jake. This was Ambassador Yexter from the Centauri Republic. He seemed bored by the whole thing. "Humans are too soft," he said without looking at Jake. "This is how order is kept. The Empire knows best." Jake did not answer. He could not trust his voice right now. His recorder was hidden in his jacket pocket, capturing everything. Back on Earth, people needed to see this. They needed to know what the Empire really was. The ship's speakers crackled to life. "Attention all observers," came a cold voice. "The demonstration will begin in 5 minutes. Please note that this action is taken under Imperial Law 2847, which states that rebellion against lawful authority is punishable by death." Jake's stomach turned. Lawful authority. As if there was anything lawful about this. The Alterans had only asked for fair prices for their crops. They had wanted schools for their children and medicine for their sick. The Empire had said no, and when the Alterans continued to ask, they were labeled rebels. Admiral Kethfor appeared on the observation deck. He was even taller in person, nearly 8 feet high. His military uniform was covered in medals and honors from 100 different campaigns. His 6 eyes swept over the gathered diplomats like searchlights. "Welcome, friends," he said in perfect galactic standard. "Today you witness the strength and justice of our great empire. Let this be a lesson to all who would disturb the peace we have built." Peace. Jake almost laughed, but the sound would have come out wrong. Twisted. The Empire called their rule peaceful, but Jake had seen the mining worlds where beings worked until they died. He had visited the factory planets where the air was. Poison and children were born sick. This was not peace. This was control through fear. The Admiral's gaze fell on Jake. "Ah, the human representative. How fortunate that your species can learn from this example. Humans are still young in galactic terms, still learning their place." Jake met those 6 eyes steadily. "We're here to observe," he said quietly. "Indeed, you are." The Admiral's voice carried a threat as soft as silk and as sharp as a blade. "I hope you observe well." Below them, soldiers in black armor moved into position. Their weapons hummed with energy that could burn through steel. The Alteran prisoners pressed closer together. Some were crying now. Others stood with quiet dignity. Even in the face of death, Jake's hand found his recorder. Earth needed to see this. Humanity needed to know. But more than that, the galaxy needed to remember. Someone had to be a witness. Someone had to say that this was wrong. The countdown began. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The Alterans began to sing. It was a soft song, something their children learned. A song about growing things and the rain that fed them. 7. 6. 5. Their voices grew stronger, not with fear, but with defiance. 4. 3. 2. Jake closed his eyes for just a moment. When he opened them, he made sure his recorder was getting everything. 1. The energy weapons fired all at once. The force fields that had held the prisoners became killing fields. Light filled the cargo bay, brighter than a star. When it faded, there was nothing left but empty space, and the smell of burned air. Silence filled the observation deck. Some of the alien diplomats nodded with approval. Others simply looked bored, as if they had just watched a routine maintenance procedure. Only Jake stood frozen, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. "Excellent," Admiral Kethfer said, as if commenting on the weather. "Order is restored. The Empire's justice is swift and fair. Justice." The word tasted like poison in Jake's. Mind. Supreme Chancellor Vexon entered the observation deck. He was the most powerful being in the Empire, and his presence made even the Admiral step back respectfully. The Chancellor's skin was pale silver, and his eyes were completely black. When he spoke, his voice was like cold wind. "I trust our guests found this educational," he said. "The Empire has ruled for 1,000 years because we understand that mercy is weakness. Strength is the only truth." He walked directly to Jake, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. "Human," he said, "your species is fortunate to learn these lessons early. Perhaps you will be wiser than the Alterans." Jake looked up at the creature who had just ordered the death of 50,000 innocent people. His training told him to be diplomatic. His survival instinct told him to stay quiet. But something deeper, something essentially human, would not let him remain silent. "This was not justice," Jake said clearly. "This was murder." The observation deck went completely quiet. Every eye turned to the small human who had just spoken words no one had ever dared to say. "And humanity will not stand silent," Jake added, his voice steady despite the fear climbing up his throat. Chancellor Vexahun's black eyes seemed to grow even darker, but he did not speak. He did not need to. The threat was clear in his silence. Morrison had just declared war on behalf of his entire species, and everyone in that room knew it. The journey back to Earth felt like the longest trip Jake Morrison had ever taken. His small diplomatic ship cut through space at maximum speed, but it still took 3 weeks to reach home. Every night, he watched the recording again. 50,000. Voices singing, then silence. The image burned in his mind like a brand. When Jake's ship finally docked at Luna Station, news crews were already waiting. Word had leaked somehow. Maybe one of the other diplomats had talked. Maybe the Empire wanted people to know. Jake walked past the cameras without speaking. He had only one destination in mind. The Terran Alliance Council building stood tall in Geneva, its glass walls reflecting the Swiss mountains. Inside, President Lisa Campbell was already waiting in the emergency session room. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Around the long table sat the most powerful people in human space. Jake connected his recorder to the main display. "You need to see this," he said simply. The room went dark except for the glow of the screen. For 20 minutes, nobody spoke. They watched the Alterans sing. They watched the energy weapons charge. They watched 50,000 people die for asking for basic rights. When the recording ended, the silence stretched like a held breath. Secretary of Defense Ryan Clark was the first to speak. He was a big man with a soldier's bearing, but his voice shook slightly. "My God," he whispered. "They're monsters." "They're the Empire," said General Patricia Hayes. She commanded Earth's defense forces and had seen war before, but nothing like this. "And they have 1,000 ships for every one of ours." President Campbell stared at the blank screen. How many people saw Jake speak out? "Everyone who matters," Jake replied. The recording was live-streamed to every major world in the Empire. By now, it's probably on every news network in the galaxy. Director of Intelligence Amy Foster leaned forward. What was their reaction? Jake's jaw tightened. "Chancellor Vexahan told me that humans would learn their place soon enough. Admiral Kethfer suggested that Earth might benefit from a similar demonstration." The room erupted in angry voices. Some called for immediate military preparation. Others demanded diplomatic protests. A few suggested backing down before things got worse. President Campbell raised her hand, and the room fell quiet. "What do you recommend, Jake?" Jake had been thinking about this question for 3 weeks. "We can't let this stand," he said. "If we stay silent, we become part of the problem. If we speak out, we might die, but at least we'll die as humans." "You're talking about challenging an empire that spans 12 star systems," Ryan Clark said. "They have military technology we can't match, fleet numbers that dwarf ours. What exactly do you think we can accomplish?" "We can be right," Jake answered. "Sometimes that's enough." General Hayes pulled up tactical displays. "Let me be clear about what we're facing. The Zephyrian Empire has over 10,000 capital ships. We have maybe 300. They have weapons that can crack planets. We have nuclear missiles that they probably use as target practice. But they have something else too," Jake said. "They have enemies, lots of them. Every species they've conquered, every world they've stripped bare, every family they've destroyed. The Empire rules through fear, but fear only works if people believe they have no choice." President Campbell studied the faces around the table. These were people who had led humanity to the stars, who had built colonies on dead worlds and turned them into gardens, who had faced the unknown and carved out a place for their species in a hostile galaxy. "Draft an ultimatum," she said finally. The room exploded again. This time the voices were louder, more desperate. "Lisa, you can't be serious," Ryan Clark said. "They'll crush us." "Maybe," the president replied. "But Jake is right. We can't let this pass. If we do, what are we? What have we become?" The next 12 hours were the longest in human political history. Lawyers worked on language. Military advisors calculated odds. Diplomats tried to find ways to soften the message. In the end, the ultimatum was simple and direct. It demanded that the Empire surrender those responsible for the Alteron genocide to face trial before an independent tribunal. It required reparations to be paid to any surviving Alteron families. It called for the Empire to formally renounce the use of genocide as a tool of control. And if the Empire refused, humanity would consider itself at war. The message was sent through official diplomatic channels to every major power in the galaxy. Within hours, it was broadcast on news networks from the core worlds to the outer rim. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some species praised humanity's courage. Others called it suicide. The betting pools on Wriggle Prime gave humanity a week before complete annihilation. Chancellor Vexan's response came exactly 72 hours later. It was brief and dismissive. "The Empire does not negotiate with insects. If the humans wish to share the fate of the Alterans, they need only continue their current path." But something else came with the official response. Something unexpected. Amy Foster burst into the president's office without knocking. Her face was flushed with excitement. "Ma'am, you need to see this." We're getting encrypted communications from all over Imperial space. The messages were hidden in routine trade communications and scientific data exchanges. But when decoded, they told an incredible story. Resistance groups on dozens of Imperial worlds were reaching out to humanity. They had been inspired by Jake's defiance and Earth's ultimatum. They want to coordinate, Amy explained. Species that have been under Imperial rule for generations are talking about uprising. They're calling it the human doctrine. President Campbell looked at the flood of incoming messages. Beings from across the galaxy were risking their lives just to send a few words of support. What exactly is the human doctrine? The idea that genocide and oppression are never acceptable, Jake said from the doorway. No matter how powerful the oppressor is, no matter what the cost of resistance might be. Ryan Clark shook his head. We've just painted a target on every human world in the galaxy. No, President Campbell said quietly. We've given hope to people who had forgotten what it felt like. That's worth the risk. Outside the windows of the council building, normal life continued. People went to work. Children played in parks. Lovers walked hand in hand. They didn't know that their leaders had just committed them to a war they couldn't win. But Jake Morrison thought of 50,000 voices singing in the face of death, and he knew they had made the right choice. Sometimes being human meant standing up for what was right, even when standing up meant standing alone. The Empire had ruled through fear for 1,000 years, but fear was a two-way street, and humanity was about to teach the galaxy something. It had forgotten. Some things were worth dying for, and some stands had to be taken, no matter the cost. Dr. Amanda Price floated in the zero-gravity lab aboard the colony ship New Horizon. Around her, samples from a dozen different worlds spun in their containers. She was a xenobiologist, someone who studied alien life forms. But today she was doing something much more dangerous than science. Her computer screen showed a message that had arrived through secret channels. The words were coded, but Amanda knew how to read them. On the mining world of Kepler-7, the workers were ready. They had been slaves in all but name for 30 years, digging rare metals from poisonous ground while their children died of lung disease. Now they wanted to fight back. Amanda's fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. She sent back technical specifications for communication devices that the Empire could not track. The plans were hidden inside routine scientific reports about soil, samples, and plant growth. To any Imperial spy, it would look like boring research data. Another message appeared, this one from the research stations near Centauri. The scientists there had been forced to develop new weapons for the Empire. Weapons that could kill entire cities with a single shot. They wanted to destroy their own work, rather than let it be used for more massacres, like the one on the Alteron. Worlds. His secret network had been growing for weeks now, ever since Jake Morrison's recording had spread across the galaxy. Every species that had suffered under Imperial rule was reaching out. They had been waiting for someone to say what Jake had said, that the Empire was wrong. That genocide was murder. That resistance was possible. Captain Van Hughes stood on the bridge of his ship, the heavy cruiser Defiance. His crew of 200 humans worked quietly at their stations. Officially, they were on a routine patrol near the neutral zone. In reality, they were meeting with resistance fighters from 6 different worlds. Contact on long-range sensors. Reported Lieutenant Carol Adams. She was young but sharp, one of the best sensor operators in the fleet. It's the transport ship we've been waiting for. Ben nodded. Take us to meeting coordinates. And Carol, make sure our jamming systems are running. If the Empire is listening, I want them to hear nothing but static. The transport ship was old and battered, the kind of vessel that hauled cargo between the outer worlds. But its passengers were anything but ordinary. They were leaders of underground movements, beings who had risked everything to attend this. Meeting Dot in the Defiance's cargo bay, Ben met with creatures he had only read about in intelligence reports. There was Vortok, a Rigelian whose people had been enslaved for 2 centuries. His skin was rough like tree bark, and his forearms were marked with scars from mining accidents. Beside him stood Zixara, a floating jellyfish-like being from the Veil Nebula. Her people had been forced to use their natural telepathy to spy on their own neighbors. "The humans have done something remarkable," Vortik said in his deep, rumbling voice. "They have reminded us that we do not have to accept our chains." Ben pulled out a case filled with small devices that looked like simple data pads. "These are quantum communicators. Your tech people can copy the design and build more. The Empire can't break the encryption, and they can't track the signals." Zixara's translucent body pulsed with excited colors. "With these, we can coordinate across hundreds of worlds. The Empire has always kept us isolated, unable to work together. That changes now." Another being stepped forward. This was Krienel, a reptilian creature from the industrial world of Fortex. His scales were permanently stained with chemical burns from the weapons factories where his people worked. What can humans offer besides communication devices? The Empire has armies. They have fleets. They have weapons that can turn worlds to ash. Ben understood the doubt. Humanity was still new to galactic politics. They had no ancient technologies or massive military forces, but they had something else. "We can offer hope," he said. "And we can offer proof that the Empire can be challenged." "Hope does not stop plasma cannons," Krienel replied. "No," Ben agreed, "but it makes people willing to stand in front of them." Over the next several hours, they planned what would become the largest coordinated resistance movement in galactic history. Each species would target Imperial facilities on their home worlds. Manufacturing plants, communication arrays, weapons. Depots. Nothing that would harm civilians, but everything that kept the Empire's war machine running. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. The Empire was vast, but that vastness was also a weakness. They could not be everywhere at once. If enough worlds rebelled simultaneously, the Imperial forces would be stretched too thin to respond effectively. Meanwhile, on the Imperial capital, world of Zephyr Prime, General Nixtar studied intelligence reports in his underground command center. The general was considered one of the Empire's finest minds, a strategic genius who had crushed a dozen rebellions over the past century. But something was different this time. His network of spies was reporting unusual activity across Imperial space, increased communications between worlds that normally had no contact, strange equipment being built in hidden workshops, meetings held in secret places. "It's the humans," his aide, Commander Feldor, suggested. "Ever since their diplomat made that statement, we've been seeing increased resistance activity." "General." Nixtar waved one of his 3 hands dismissively. "Humans are barely past the primitive stage. They have no experience with galactic warfare. Their entire military could not conquer a single Imperial sector. But they have inspired others," Felder pressed. "The resistance groups are more organized now, more coordinated." "Impossible," the general replied. "We have kept the conquered species isolated for good reason. They cannot communicate across star systems without our networks. They cannot coordinate anything larger than local protests." What General Nixtar did not know was that human engineers had solved the communication problem. The quantum devices that Captain Hughes was distributing created an invisible network that connected resistance cells across the galaxy. For the first time in Imperial history, the conquered species could work together. Dr. Amanda Price received another coded message. This one from the agricultural world of New Eden. The farmers there were ready to stop food shipments to Imperial military bases. Without steady supplies, those bases would have to abandon their positions or starve. From the factory world of Titans, Rest came word that the workers were prepared to sabotage the assembly lines that built Imperial war machines. From the mining colonies came promises to collapse the tunnels that provided rare metals for Imperial weapons. It was like a massive spider web spreading across the galaxy, with Earth at the center. Each connection made the web stronger. Each new contact brought more resources and more possibilities. Jake Morrison, now working as Earth's liaison to the resistance movement, looked at the star maps showing all their contacts. Red dots marked worlds where resistance cells were active. In just 6 weeks, the number had grown from 12 to over 200. "They're calling it the human doctrine," Amanda reported during their weekly briefing. "The idea that moral courage matters more than military strength. That standing up for what's right is worth any risk." Jake nodded, but his expression was troubled. The Empire won't stay blind to this forever. When they figure out what's happening, they'll respond with force. "Let them," Amanda said firmly. "The resistance is ready. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire will face enemies on every front instead of just one." Outside the observation window of New Horizon, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns. Those same stars shone down on hundreds of worlds, where beings were preparing to risk everything for freedom. They had been inspired by a simple human truth, that some things were more important than survival. The Empire had ruled through fear for so long that they had forgotten another powerful force: hope. And hope, once awakened, was harder to kill than any army. The alarm started screaming at 0600 hours Earth time. In the Orbital Defense Command Center above Luna, General Patricia Hayes watched her screens fill with red warning symbols. Her coffee cup shook in her hand as she read the sensor reports. "How many ships?" she asked quietly. Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker checked his readings 3 times before answering. 230 Imperial warships, ma'am, including 12 of their super dreadnoughts." Patricia felt her heart sink. Earth's entire home defense fleet consisted of 48 ships, most of them converted merchant vessels. They had orbital weapons platforms and missile satellites. But against a force this size, it would be like throwing rocks at a hurricane. Time to arrival? 18 hours at current speed. In the White House Situation Room, President Lisa Campbell received the news with the same calm she had shown throughout the crisis. Around her, the most powerful people in human government tried not to look as scared as they felt. "They're not even trying to hide their intentions," said Secretary of Defense Ryan Clark. His face was pale, and his hands shook slightly as he spoke. Admiral Kethver sent a message on all frequencies: "Surrender unconditionally or watch Earth burn like the Alteran homeworld." The room fell silent. Everyone remembered the recording of 50,000 Alterans dying in flames. Now the Empire was promising to do the same thing to humanity's home world. "What are options?" President Campbell asked. General Hayes activated the tactical display. Earth appeared as a blue dot surrounded by red enemy markers. "We can evacuate as many people as possible to the outer colonies. Our fastest ships might get a few million people to safety before the Empire arrives, and leave everyone else to die," the president said flatly. "Ma'am, we're facing the most powerful military force in the galaxy. Our entire fleet couldn't stop a single Imperial dreadnought, much less 200 ships." Director Amy Foster leaned forward. "We might have another option. Dr. Price and her team have been working on something. They call it the Quantum Resonance Beacon." She explained the plan quickly. The beacon would send a faster-than-light signal to every resistance cell in the galaxy simultaneously. It would trigger coordinated uprisings on hundreds of Imperial worlds at once. The idea was to force the Empire to fight on so many fronts that they could not focus their full strength on Earth. "There's just one problem," Amy continued. "The beacon has to be activated from inside the Imperial fleet's formation. Someone has to get close enough to their command ships to make the signal work. Ryan Clark shook his head. That's suicide. No ship could penetrate their defenses and survive long enough to activate anything. Not no ship, came a voice from the doorway. Captain Ben Hughes walked into the room, still wearing his spacesuit from a rushed trip back to Earth. His ship, the Defiance, was the fastest and most heavily armed vessel in the human fleet. Ben, you can't be serious, General Hayes said. Even the Defiance couldn't survive what you're talking about. Ben sat down at the table and looked each person in the eye. My ship can carry the beacon. We can modify our engines to give us one burst of incredible speed. We might get close enough to activate the signal before they destroy us. Might is not good enough, Ryan Clark argued. You're talking about sacrificing your ship and crew for a plan that probably won't work. It will work, Ben said firmly. Not the part about my ship surviving, but the signal will get through. And when it does, the Empire will face rebellions on every world they control. President Campbell studied the tactical display. 200 Imperial ships against 48 human vessels. Over 6 billion people on Earth who could not be evacuated in time. And one desperate plan that might save them all. I need to speak with my crew first, Ben said. They have a right to know what they're volunteering for. An hour later, Ben stood in the Defiance's main hangar bay. His crew of 200 gathered. Around him, they were young and old, experienced veterans and fresh recruits, but they all had one thing in common. They were human. I'm not going to lie to you, Ben began. This mission will probably kill us all. Our job is to fly into the middle of the Imperial fleet, activate a signal beacon, and hope it works before they blow us to pieces. The hangar was completely quiet, except for the hum of the ship's life support systems. Anyone who wants to transfer to another ship can do so. No questions asked. No shame in choosing to live. Lieutenant Carol Adams was the first to speak. Sir, respectfully, where exactly would we transfer to? Every human ship is going to be in this fight. At least on the Defiance, we have a chance to make a difference. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Chief Engineer Tony Martinez stepped forward. Captain, my family lives on Earth. My kids are down there. If this beacon thing can save them, then that's what we're going to do. One by one, the crew members voiced their support. Not because they wanted to die, but because they understood what was at stake. This was bigger than their own survival. This was about the right of every species in the galaxy to live free from fear. Back on Earth, Jake Morrison sat in his apartment and watched the news reports. Every channel showed the same thing. The massive Imperial fleet approaching like a dark cloud. Military experts explaining why resistance was hopeless. Religious leaders offering prayers for humanity's final hours. But Jake also saw something else. Messages were pouring in from across the galaxy. Resistance cells on hundreds of worlds were reporting that they were ready. The Regellian miners had explosive charges placed on every Imperial facility on their world. The Centauri scientists had viruses ready to crash Imperial computer systems. The factory workers on dozens of planets were prepared to destroy the machines. That built Imperial weapons. Dr. Amanda Price appeared on Jake's door screen. She looked exhausted but determined. It's time, she said simply. Jake grabbed his coat and followed her to the spaceport. The quantum beacon was already loaded aboard. The Defiance. It looked like nothing special, just a black box covered in blinking lights. But this small device might save not just Earth, but every oppressed world in Imperial space. Captain Hughes was doing final checks on his ship when they arrived. The Defiance had been modified for the mission. Extra armor plating covered critical systems. The engines had been boosted beyond safe limits. It would fly faster than any human ship had ever flown, but probably only once. Are you sure this will work? Jake asked Amanda. She looked at the beacon and then at the stars visible through the spaceport windows. Somewhere out there, beings on hundreds of worlds were waiting for the signal that would tell them it was time to fight back. "I'm sure it's our only chance," she replied. "The Empire has ruled through fear for 1,000 years. Today we find out if hope is stronger than fear." The Defiance launched at sunset Earth time. As it accelerated toward the approaching Imperial fleet, Captain Ben Hughes opened a communication channel to every human ship and defense station. "This is Captain Hughes. Today we stand not just for Earth, but for every species that believes. Freedom is worth fighting for. Whatever happens to us, remember that some things are more important than survival. Some stands have to be taken, no matter the cost." The Imperial fleet waited in space like a collection of metal mountains. Admiral Kethfer watched the single human ship approaching and laughed. One vessel against 200. It was almost insulting. He had no idea that this one ship carried the key to the Empire's downfall, or that its crew was about to prove that. Sometimes the smallest actions could change the fate of entire galaxies. Captain Ben Hughes gripped his command chair as the Defiance flew toward the Imperial fleet at impossible speed. The modified engines screamed in protest, pushing far beyond their design limits. Around him, his crew worked with calm efficiency, even though they all knew they were flying to their deaths. "Distance to Imperial formation?" Ben asked. Lieutenant Carol Adams checked her sensors. 50,000 kilometers and closing fast. "They're powering up weapons, sir." "Good," Ben replied. "Let them think we're just another desperate attack. The longer they underestimate us, the better our chances." On the bridge of Admiral Kethfer's flagship, the Eternal Dominion, officers watched the single human ship approach with amusement. The Admiral himself seemed almost bored by the sight. "One ship," he mused to his aide, "against my entire fleet. Either these humans are incredibly brave or incredibly stupid." "Perhaps both, sir," the aide replied. "Let them get closer." "I want to capture their ship intact. The Chancellor will enjoy interrogating the survivors." But Admiral Kethfer had made a fatal mistake. He had forgotten that humans were full of surprises. Ben waited until they were deep inside the Imperial formation before giving the order. "Now, Carol, activate the beacon." The quantum resonance beacon came to life with a sound like singing crystal. Energy poured from the small device, creating ripples in space-time itself. The signal raced outward faster than light, carrying a simple message to every resistance cell in the galaxy. Now, on the mining world of Kepler-7, Vortok received the signal and smiled with all four of his mouths. He pressed a button, and explosions bloomed across the Imperial weapons factories. 100 years of forced labor ended in fire and falling metal. On the research stations near Centauri, Dr. Zixara felt the signal pulse through her telepathic mind. She activated the computer viruses her team had prepared. Across the Empire, Imperial networks crashed as alien code ate through their systems like digital acid. On the factory world of Titan's Rest, workers abandoned their posts and destroyed the assembly lines that built Imperial war machines. The sound of breaking metal echoed through enormous halls as beings who had been slaves remembered what freedom meant. The beacon's signal reached 47 worlds simultaneously. On each one, resistance fighters struck at Imperial facilities. With surgical precision, communication arrays went dark. Weapons depots exploded. Supply lines collapsed. Admiral Kethvar watched his tactical display fill with emergency signals from across the Empire. At first, he could not understand what he was seeing. Single reports of rebellion were common, but this was different. This was coordinated. "Sir?" His communications officer called out. "We're receiving distress calls from 12 different sectors." all reporting simultaneous attacks on Imperial facilities. The Admiral's 6 eyes widened in shock. Impossible. The conquered species cannot coordinate across star systems. We control all long-range communications. The reports keep coming. Sir, 30 worlds now reporting uprisings. 40, 50. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kethver felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. Not fear of death in battle, but fear of the impossible. The Empire's greatest strength had always been its size. No single world could threaten them, because they could bring the full weight of their military to bear on any rebellion. But if every world rebelled at once, recall the fleet, he ordered suddenly. All ships returned to their home sectors immediately. Sir, his aide questioned. What about Earth? The Admiral looked at the small blue world they had come to destroy. Earth can wait. If we lose control of our core worlds, there will be no empire left to rule. Captain Ben Hughes felt the Defiance shudder as Imperial weapons finally found their target. Hull plates melted away under concentrated fire. The beacon was still transmitting, but his ship was dying around him. Signal sent successfully, Captain, Carol reported, even as sparks flew from her console. Every resistance cell in the galaxy should have received it. Ben nodded with satisfaction. They had done their job. Now it was up to the rest of the galaxy to finish what they had started. It's been an honor serving with you all, he said to his crew over the intercom. Tell them we went down fighting. The Defiance exploded in a ball of white fire, taking Ben Hughes and his brave crew with it. But their sacrifice had changed everything. Within hours, the Empire found itself fighting wars on dozens of fronts. Fleets that had been heading to Earth were recalled to defend core worlds. Planets that had been peaceful for centuries erupted in rebellion. The carefully maintained order of 1,000 years crumbled in a single day. 3 months later, Jake Morrison stood in what had once been the Imperial throne room on Zephyr Prime. The Golden Palace had been transformed into a courthouse, where war criminals faced justice. Chancellor Vexahan sat in chains, his black eyes no longer carrying the arrogance of absolute power. The tribunal finds you guilty of genocide, crimes against sentience, and violations of basic sapient rights, announced Judge Krienal, the same reptilian being who had once doubted human resolve. You are sentenced to life imprisonment on a penal colony, where you will spend your remaining years thinking about the 50,000 Alterans you murdered. The former chancellor did not speak. There was nothing left to say outside the courthouse. Beings from dozens of species celebrated in the streets. The Zephyrian Empire was finished. In its place, a new galactic council had been formed, with representation for every species. The first law they passed was simple. Genocide would never again be tolerated anywhere in the galaxy. Dr. Amanda Price worked with scientists from across the galaxy to establish communication networks that no single power could control. The quantum resonance technology that had triggered the rebellion now connected free worlds in permanent alliance. General Patricia Hayes helped train defense forces for newly liberated worlds. Species that had been defenseless for centuries learned to protect themselves and their neighbors. President Lisa Campbell addressed the new Galactic Council on its opening day. Humanity does not seek to rule, she said. We only wanted to prove that evil is not inevitable, that courage can overcome any odds, that standing together we are stronger than any tyrant. A year after the rebellion, Jake Morrison returned to the Alteran Memorial on what had been their homeworld. 50,000 names were carved in black stone. Children from a dozen different species played in the gardens that had been planted around the monument. An old Alteran survivor approached him, one of the few who had been off-world during the massacre. Her name was Velana, and she carried a small flower from the gardens. They died singing, she said softly. Even at the end, they sang about hope. Jake nodded, remembering the recording that had started everything. They're still singing, he replied. Every time someone stands up to injustice, their voices are heard. As the sun set over the memorial gardens, Jake thought about Captain Ben Hughes and his crew, about the 50,000 Alterans who had died for asking for basic rights, about all the beings across the galaxy who had risked everything for freedom. The galaxy had learned something important from humanity that day. Not that humans were the strongest or the smartest species, but that some things were more important than survival. Some principles were worth dying for. And sometimes, if you were brave enough to say no to evil, you might discover that you were not standing alone after all. In the end, the Zephyrian Empire had fallen not to superior weapons or vast armies, but to a simple human truth. That moral courage, shared freely, could light fires across the stars that no amount of force could extinguish. The galaxy was free, and it would never forget the species that taught them freedom was possible.